I've learned that the most dangerous people in corporate America aren't the ones screaming in boardrooms. They're the ones who walk in thinking they already own the place without bothering to check the deed. My name is Jessica, and I've been with Meridian Industries for 7 years. Long enough to see 3 CEOs come and go, survive a major lawsuit, and watch this company nearly collapse during the 2020 crisis. I'm not the type to announce my presence with designer suits or corner office politics. I just do my job, and I do it well. What nobody knew, not even my closest colleagues, was that I owned 62% of this company. When Meridian was hemorrhaging money 3 years ago, facing bankruptcy and a hostile takeover from our biggest competitor, I made a decision that would change everything. Using my late father's life insurance payout and my own savings, I bought out the failing investors through a shell company registered in Delaware. No fanfare, no press releases, no ego trip. I just wanted to save the jobs of people I'd grown to care about. The paperwork was buried in legal documents that most people never read. To everyone else, I was just Jessica Miller, Senior Operations Manager, the quiet woman who fixed problems and asked for nothing in return. That anonymity was about to become my greatest weapon. Then came Marcus Wellington, fresh MBA from Wharton, hired as our new Director of Strategic Operations. He arrived on a Tuesday morning with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. Tall, polished, with a smile that photographed well and a handshake that lingered just long enough to make you uncomfortable. In his first team meeting, he stood at the head of the conference table like he was addressing shareholders at an IPO. "I'm here to revolutionize how we think about efficiency," he announced, his voice carrying that practiced cadence of someone who'd given this speech before. "We're going to streamline operations, eliminate redundancies, and position this company for exponential growth." The buzzwords flowed like water. Synergy, optimization, scalability. I watched my colleagues nod along, some genuinely impressed, others just trying to appear engaged. I said nothing, just took notes and observed. In my experience, the loudest voices in the room usually had the least to say. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began what he called his comprehensive evaluation of all departments. It started with lengthy interviews where he asked probing questions about workflow, productivity metrics, and team dynamics. When my turn came, I answered honestly and thoroughly, explaining systems I'd built, processes I'd streamlined, and the reasoning behind operational decisions that had saved the company millions. He listened with the kind of attention that felt performative, nodding at appropriate intervals, but clearly already forming his conclusions. When I finished explaining our supply chain optimization project, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "That's interesting," he said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "I think there might be some more modern approaches we could explore." Modern approaches. As if the systems that had kept us profitable for 3 years were suddenly obsolete because he'd learned different theories in business school. But I remained professional. "I'd be happy to discuss any improvements you have in mind." "Oh, I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunities for that," he replied, already looking at his watch. The writing was on the wall, but I wanted to see how far he'd go. The answer came sooner than expected. Marcus began holding strategy sessions with select team members. Department heads who'd been with the company for years suddenly found themselves excluded from decisions about their own areas of expertise. Projects were reassigned, budgets reallocated, and reporting structures changed without consultation. I watched it happen with the detached fascination of someone observing a slow-motion car crash. Marcus wasn't just reorganizing. He was dismantling everything that worked and replacing it with systems that looked good on paper but ignored the realities of our business. The breaking point came when he canceled our biggest client presentation. I'd spent 3 months preparing a comprehensive analysis of their supply chain needs, working directly with their executive team to understand their requirements. The presentation was scheduled for Friday morning, and by Wednesday, I still hadn't received the final brief from Marcus's office. When I inquired, his assistant informed me that the presentation had been restructured and would be handled by Marcus personally. 3 months of work, dismissed with a corporate euphemism. That evening, I sat in my car in the parking garage, staring at the concrete walls and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, undiluted rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that leads to shouting matches, but the cold, calculating variety that sharpens focus and clarifies purpose. I pulled out my phone and called David Morrison, our company's longtime legal counsel, and one of the few people who knew about my ownership stake. David, it's Jessica. I think it's time we had a conversation about Marcus Wellington. There was a pause. What kind of conversation? The kind where I start acting like the majority shareholder instead of the helpful employee. I was wondering when you'd reach that point, he said quietly. What do you need from me? A board meeting. This Friday. I want to discuss strategic direction and leadership effectiveness. I'll send the notices tomorrow morning. Jessica? Yes. It's about time. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Marcus was already in his office, door closed, voice audible through the glass as he conducted what sounded like a heated phone call. I didn't try to listen. I had my own preparations to make. I spent the morning pulling reports, financial statements, and performance metrics. Not for Marcus's review, but for my own presentation. 7 years of data, 3 years of ownership, and countless examples of successful operations under my oversight. If he wanted to play the numbers game, I'd show him what real performance looked like. Around noon, Marcus emerged from his office with a stack of papers and the expression of someone who'd just won a lottery. He walked directly to my desk, not bothering to sit down. Jessica, we need to talk. Conference room now. I saved my work, closed my laptop, and followed him down the hallway. The conference room felt smaller than usual, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the polished table. Marcus sat down heavily, spreading his papers in front of him like evidence in a trial. I've been doing a lot of thinking about your role here, he began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to recognize. And I think we need to have an honest conversation about fit. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. You've been here a long time, and I'm sure you've developed certain attachments to how things are done. But the reality is this company needs to evolve, and I'm not sure you're ready to evolve with it. Still, I said nothing. Your presentation yesterday was a perfect example. Comprehensive, sure, but completely lacking in innovative thinking. It was exactly what I'd expect from someone who's been doing the same job for 7 years without growth or ambition. He leaned back, clearly pleased with his assessment. I think it would be best for everyone if we discussed a transition plan. Maybe something in a consulting capacity, or perhaps you'd prefer to explore opportunities elsewhere. The silence stretched between us. I could hear the distant hum of the air conditioning, the muffled sounds of office life continuing beyond these walls. Marcus was watching me expectantly, probably anticipating tears or pleading, or the kind of desperate negotiation he'd likely seen before. Instead, I leaned forward slightly and asked, "Are you firing me, Marcus?" He blinked, caught off guard by the directness. "I'm suggesting we explore alternatives that might be more suitable for your skill set and career goals." "That's not what I asked," I said calmly. "Are you firing me?" I think firing is a harsh word. I prefer to think of it as strategic realignment. I almost smiled. "So yes, you're firing me. If you want to put it that way, then yes. I think it's time for you to move on." "Interesting," I said, pulling out my phone. "I need to make a call." Marcus frowned. Now. I dialed David's number, putting the phone on speaker. He answered on the second ring. "David Morrison." "David, it's Jessica. I'm in a meeting with Marcus Wellington, and I need you to confirm something for him." "Of course. What do you need?" "Could you please explain to Marcus who the majority shareholder of Meridian Industries is?" There was a pause, then David's voice, clear and professional. "The majority shareholder of Meridian Industries is Miller Holdings, LLC, which is wholly owned by Jessica Miller. She holds 62% of all outstanding shares." The color drained from Marcus's face. He stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. "And could you remind me," I continued, "what authority the majority shareholder has regarding personnel decisions?" "Complete authority," David replied. "All executive-level terminations require approval from the majority shareholder. Additionally, the majority shareholder has the right to remove any employee, including executives, with or without cause." I ended the call and looked at Marcus, who appeared to be processing this information like a computer trying to run software it wasn't designed for. So, I said pleasantly, let's talk about that strategic realignment. Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. You own the company? 62% of it, yes. The rest is held by various investors, none of whom have more than 8% individually. But you're just your operations. You don't even have a parking space. I don't need a parking space. I own the building too. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus slumped back in his chair, his carefully constructed confidence crumbling like a house of cards in a windstorm. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. Because I wanted to see what kind of leader you really were. Whether you take time to understand the company, respect the people who build it, or work collaboratively with your team. I paused. You failed on all counts. I was trying to improve things, make the company more efficient. You were trying to tear down systems you didn't understand and replace them with textbook theories that don't work in the real world. You dismissed 3 months of work without even reviewing it. You excluded experienced team members from decisions about their own departments. And you just tried to fire the person who's been keeping this company profitable for 3 years. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Now we have a board meeting on Friday. The same board meeting where you were planning to present your strategic vision for the company's future. And we're going to have a different kind of conversation. I stood up, gathering my things. In the meantime, I suggest you spend some time thinking about what you've learned here, about assumptions, about leadership, and about the importance of understanding who you're working with before you decide they're expendable. As I reached the door, I turned back. Oh, and Marcus? That presentation you canceled? I'm reinstating it. We'll be meeting with the client Monday morning, and you'll be there to observe how real, strategic thinking works. I left him sitting alone in the conference room, staring at the table where his career had just taken a very different turn than he'd planned. The rest of the week passed in a strange, sort of suspended animation. Word of our conversation hadn't spread officially, but in offices like ours, information travels through invisible channels. I noticed people watching me differently, not with the casual acknowledgement of a colleague, but with the subtle deference usually reserved for executives. Marcus, for his part, seemed to be experiencing the 5 stages of grief in rapid succession. Thursday morning, I found him in the break room at 6 a.m., staring at a cup of coffee like it might contain answers. Jessica, he said as I approached the coffee machine. I've been thinking about what you said. Good. Thinking is generally advisable before making major decisions. I want to apologize. I made assumptions, and I was wrong. I studied his face, looking for sincerity behind the obvious desperation. Apologies are nice, Marcus, but they don't undo damage. You tried to dismiss 3 months of work, exclude experienced team members, and fire someone you'd never bother to understand. Those aren't mistakes, they're character flaws. But I can change. I can learn. Maybe. But trust, once broken, is difficult to repair, especially when it was never really built in the first place. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel sharper, more defined. I dressed carefully, not for drama, but for authority. Navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a way that suggested I meant business. The boardroom was already occupied when I arrived. David Morrison sat at one end of the table, his usual stack of legal documents arranged neatly in front of him. 3 other board members were present: Robert Chen, our CFO, Maria Santos, head of human resources, and Dr. Patricia Williams, an external advisor who'd been with us since the beginning. Marcus entered exactly at 9 a.m., looking like a man walking to his own execution. His usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, his confidence replaced by nervous energy. Good morning, everyone, David began. We're here to discuss strategic direction and leadership effectiveness, as requested by our majority shareholder. All eyes turned to me. In 7 years, I never sat at this table as anything other than an occasional presenter. Now, I was the reason everyone was here. Before we begin, I said, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge or personal grievances. It's about the future of this company and the people who depend on it. Marcus shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Over the past month, I've observed a pattern of decision-making that concerns me. Decisions made without consultation, experience dismissed without consideration, and operational changes implemented without understanding their impact. I opened my folder and distributed copies of a report I'd prepared. This document outlines specific instances where hasty decisions have cost us time, money, and client relationships. It also includes feedback from employees across multiple departments about the current leadership approach. Robert Chen flipped through the pages, his expression growing more serious with each turn. These are significant concerns, Jessica. The financial impact alone is troubling. The financial impact is secondary to the human impact, I replied. Good people are considering leaving. Projects are being abandoned midstream. The collaborative culture we've built over 7 years is being dismantled in favor of a hierarchical system that doesn't fit our business model. Maria Santos nodded. We've received several informal complaints through HR channels. Nothing official, but people are definitely concerned about the direction we're heading. I turned to Marcus. Would you like to respond to these concerns? He cleared his throat, looking around the table before speaking. I acknowledge that my transition into this role has been challenging. I may have moved too quickly on some initiatives without fully understanding their implications. May have. Dr. Williams asked quietly. I did move too quickly. I made assumptions about what needed to be changed without adequately consulting with the team or understanding existing systems. And yesterday? I asked. When you attempted to terminate my employment? The room fell silent. Marcus's face reddened. I made a serious error in judgment. I didn't understand the full scope of Jessica's contributions to the company or her position within it. Her position? Robert Chen asked, clearly confused. David Morrison spoke up. Marcus attempted to fire Jessica without realizing she's the majority shareholder of the company. The silence that followed was profound. Robert Chen's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. Maria Santos leaned back in her chair, as if she'd been physically pushed. Dr. Williams, typically unflappable, stared at me with undisguised amazement. Jessica, Robert said slowly, are you the majority shareholder? I have been for 3 years. Since we bought out Meridian Industries and the other failing investors during the crisis. But you never acted like an owner. You just did your job. I did my job because that's what the company needed. I didn't buy these shares for power or prestige. I bought them to save jobs and keep a good company from being destroyed by people who didn't understand its value. Dr. Williams leaned forward. And now I'm forced to act like an owner because someone has been hired who doesn't understand the difference between leadership and domination. I looked directly at Marcus. Leadership is about bringing out the best in people, not proving that you're smarter than everyone else. It's about building on what works, not tearing down what you don't understand. And it's about recognizing that the people who've been here longest might actually know something valuable. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand that now. I understand that I've been approaching this all wrong. Understanding is the first step, I said. But understanding without action is just awareness. What matters is what you do next. What would you like me to do? I paused, considering. I want you to start over. Not your position, but your approach. I want you to spend the next month learning instead of teaching. I want you to sit down with every department head and ask them to explain their systems, their challenges, and their goals. I want you to observe our client interactions, understand our relationships, and see how we actually operate. And then we'll have another conversation about whether you're the right person to lead strategic operations at this company. The meeting concluded with a formal restructuring of Marcus's role. He would report directly to me for the next 90 days, with specific goals for learning and collaboration. It wasn't a demotion exactly, but it was a clear redefinition of authority. As everyone filed out, David Morrison hung back. That was well handled, he said quietly. Was it? I feel like I just publicly humiliated someone. You publicly corrected someone who needed correction. There's a difference. I looked out the window at the parking lot, where Marcus was walking slowly to his car, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I hope he can learn from this," I said. "And if he can't, then I'll have to make a harder decision." The following weeks brought a transformation that surprised everyone, including me. Marcus threw himself into the learning process with the same intensity he'd previously applied to restructuring. He spent entire days shadowing different departments, asking questions instead of making pronouncements, observing instead of directing. I watched him discover things about our operations that should have been obvious from the beginning. The way our supply chain team had built relationships with vendors that went beyond simple transactions. The reason our client services approach emphasized long-term partnerships over short-term profits. The interconnected nature of systems that looked inefficient on paper but worked beautifully in practice. Most importantly, I saw him begin to understand the people he'd been so quick to dismiss. Janet in accounting, who developed a forecasting system that saved us thousands in unnecessary inventory. Tom in logistics, whose seemingly casual conversations with drivers had prevented 3 major shipping disasters. Sarah in client services, whose intuitive understanding of customer needs had turned potential complaints into expansion opportunities. "I had no idea," Marcus said during one of our weekly check-ins. "I thought I was looking at inefficiency, but I was actually seeing expertise I didn't recognize." "Experience often looks like inefficiency to someone who's never had it," I replied. "The question is whether you can build on that experience or whether you'll always see it as an obstacle to overcome." I'm starting to understand the difference. 3 months later, Marcus presented his strategic vision to the board again. This time, instead of revolutionary changes, he proposed evolutionary improvements. Instead of replacing existing systems, he suggested refinements that would enhance their effectiveness. Instead of dismissing the team's experience, he highlighted their expertise and found ways to leverage it more effectively. The presentation was thoughtful, collaborative, and realistic. It showed not just what he'd learned about operations, but what he'd learned about leadership. After the meeting, as we walked back to our offices, Marcus stopped me in the hallway. "Jessica, I need to thank you." "For what?" "For not firing me when you had every reason to." "I considered this." "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about that. I could have fired you that day in the conference room. It would have been easy, justified, and probably satisfying. But I realized that would have been the same kind of leadership mistake you were making." "What do you mean?" "You were ready to fire me because you thought I wasn't capable of growth. If I'd fired you for the same reason, I'd have been just as wrong. People can change, but only if they're given the opportunity to do so." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm glad you gave me that opportunity. The opportunity was always there. You just had to choose to take it." 6 months later, Meridian Industries was performing better than it had in years. Our client retention rate was up, employee satisfaction scores had improved significantly, and we'd successfully launched 2 new product lines that combined operational efficiency with customer-focused innovation. Marcus had evolved into the kind of leader I'd hoped he could become. He still had ambition and drive, but now it was tempered by wisdom and respect for the people around him. He'd learned that true authority comes not from position but from competence, not from dominance, but from service. As for me, I gradually stepped back from the day-to-day oversight of his role. I remained the majority shareholder, but I returned to what I'd always preferred: solving problems, building systems, and working with people who shared my commitment to excellence. The story of Marcus's transformation spread throughout the company, though not in the way you might expect. No one talked about the board meeting or the dramatic revelation of my ownership. Instead, they talked about the change in leadership style, the renewed focus on collaboration, and the sense that their expertise was valued again. One afternoon, I found a note on my desk from Janet in accounting. "I don't know what you said to Marcus, but thank you. He actually listened to my suggestions about the forecasting system and implemented them. It's nice to feel heard again." Similar notes appeared from other departments. People felt valued, respected, and empowered to contribute their best work. The culture of fear that had been developing was replaced by one of mutual respect and shared purpose. Looking back, I realized that the real victory wasn't in revealing my ownership or correcting Marcus's behavior. It was in creating an environment where good people could do their best work, where experience was valued alongside innovation, and where leadership meant serving others rather than serving yourself. The company thrived not because I'd asserted my authority, but because I'd used it to restore the collaborative culture that had always been our greatest strength. And Marcus, despite his rocky start, had become an integral part of that culture. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving that a different way is possible and giving people the chance to be better than they thought they could be. Years later, when people asked me about leadership, I would tell them about Marcus Wellington. Not as a cautionary tale about arrogance or assumption, but as a success story about growth and redemption. Because the measure of a leader isn't whether they make mistakes, but whether they learn from them and help others do the same. In the end, that's what real power looks like. Not the authority to punish or control, but the wisdom to guide and the patience to teach. And sometimes, the greatest victory is watching someone you could have destroyed choose to become someone better instead. That's the kind of leadership that builds companies, develops people, and creates lasting value. And that's the kind of leader I'm proud to be. But the story doesn't end there. Success, I've learned, has a way of attracting new challenges, and our improved performance at Meridian Industries hadn't gone unnoticed in the industry. It was a Thursday morning in late spring when David Morrison called me into his office with an expression I'd rarely seen on his face, concern mixed with excitement. "Jessica, we have a situation," he said, closing the door behind me. "Harrison Industries wants to buy us back." I sat down slowly. Harrison Industries was the same company that had tried to acquire us during our financial crisis 3 years earlier. The same company whose hostile takeover attempt had prompted me to become the majority shareholder in the first place. "They're offering significantly above market value," David continued. 40% premium on current stock price. For a company our size, it's an extraordinary offer. What's the catch? No catch, exactly. But they're requiring a response within 2 weeks, and they want to meet with the leadership team next Monday. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. They don't know I'm the majority shareholder, do they? No reason they would. Your ownership is still held through Miller Holdings, and that's not public information. So, they think they're negotiating with Marcus and the board. Exactly. That afternoon, I called an emergency leadership meeting. Marcus, Robert Chen, Maria Santos, Dr. Williams, and I gathered in the conference room where so much had changed just months earlier. Harrison Industries wants to acquire us, I announced without preamble. They're offering 40% above market value and want to meet Monday. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Marcus was the first to speak. That's an incredible offer. Most of our shareholders would be thrilled. Most shareholders, yes, I said carefully. But the decision ultimately rests with the majority shareholder. Robert Chen nodded. Of course. Have you been in contact with Miller Holdings about their position? I glanced at David, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Miller Holdings is me, I said quietly. I am Miller Holdings. The silence was different this time. Not the shocked silence of Marcus's revelation months earlier, but the contemplative quiet of people reassessing everything they thought they knew. Maria Santos spoke first. You've been the majority shareholder this whole time?
For 3 years, yes.
Since Harrison first tried to acquire us. Dr. Williams leaned forward. So the decision is entirely yours. Legally, yes. But I don't make decisions about this company in isolation. You're all stakeholders in different ways, and your input matters. Marcus cleared his throat. May I ask, are you considering the offer? I looked around the table at these people who'd become more than colleagues over the years. I'm considering everything. The offer is generous, almost suspiciously so. The question is why Harrison is so eager to acquire us now. They see our performance improvements, Robert suggested. Our client retention, our new product lines. Maybe. Or maybe they see something else. Over the weekend, I did what I always did when facing a major decision. Research. I dug into Harrison Industries' recent activities, their financial statements, their strategic announcements. What I found was troubling. Harrison had been acquiring smaller companies at an unprecedented rate over the past 18 months. Companies with strong client relationships, innovative products, or specialized expertise. But instead of integrating these acquisitions, they were dismantling them, keeping only the most profitable elements and dissolving the rest. It was a strip mining operation disguised as corporate growth. Monday morning, the Harrison Industries team arrived in 2 black SUVs. 3 executives in identical dark suits, led by a woman named Victoria Hartwell, who introduced herself as Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions. "Ms. Miller," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard wonderful things about your operations work here." "Thank you. Though I should clarify my role for accuracy." Victoria's smile flickered slightly. "Of course. Mr. Wellington here is the Strategic Operations Director, correct?" "He is. But he reports to me." "I see. And you report to?" "No one. I own the company." The silence that followed was electric. Victoria's professional composure cracked just enough to reveal the calculation happening behind her eyes. "I'm sorry, there must be some confusion in our research. We were told the ownership structure was more distributed." "Common misconception. I hold 62% through Miller Holdings." Victoria glanced at her associates, both of whom were frantically typing on their phones. "Well, that certainly simplifies the negotiation process." "Does it?" We moved to the large conference room, where Victoria spread out presentation materials with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Meridian Industries has built an impressive operation," she began. "Your client retention rates, your operational efficiency, your market position, all exactly what Harrison is looking for in a strategic acquisition. And what happens to our employees after the acquisition? Naturally, there would be some redundancies as we integrate operations. Harrison has existing infrastructure that could absorb much of your administrative and support functions." "How much of our workforce would be retained?" Victoria's pause was telling. "We estimate approximately 40% of your current staff would transition to Harrison roles." I felt the temperature in the room drop. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Robert Chen's jaw tightened visibly. "And our clients?" "Would be transitioned to Harrison's existing account management structure, which is much more robust and scalable than your current system. The system that's achieved 96% client retention over 3 years?" "Well, yes, but Harrison's economies of scale would allow for more competitive pricing and expanded service offerings." I leaned forward. "Ms. Hartwell, let me ask you directly. What does Harrison actually want from this acquisition?" "I'm not sure I understand the question." "You're offering 40% above market value for a company, but your plan involves eliminating 60% of our workforce and dismantling our client service model. That suggests you're not buying us for operations." Victoria's smile became strained. "We're buying you for your market position and client relationships, which you then plan to transfer to your existing systems." That's a simplified way of putting it. It's an accurate way of putting it. I stood up, moving to the window that overlooked our parking lot. I could see employees arriving for work, people who'd been with us through restructurings and crises, people who'd built something worth protecting. "Ms. Hartwell, I appreciate Harrison's interest, but I'm going to decline your offer." "Ms. Miller, with respect, you may want to reconsider. 40% above market value is extraordinary for a company of your size. Money isn't everything. Perhaps we could discuss a higher offer?" I turned back to face her. "It's not about the money. It's about what happens to the people who built this company and the clients who trust us." Victoria's professionalism slipped another notch. "Ms. Miller, in today's market, companies like yours are either acquired or crushed by larger competitors. Harrison is offering you a generous exit strategy. Or what? Or you'll find yourself competing against companies with 10 times your resources and no sentimental attachment to employees or outdated business models." The threat was subtle but clear. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Robert Chen was staring at Victoria with undisguised disgust. "Ms. Hartwell," I said calmly, "I think this meeting is over." "Ms. Miller, you're making a mistake. In 6 months, when you're struggling to compete against Harrison's superior market position, Remember that we offered you a way out. I'll take my chances. After they left, the conference room felt like the aftermath of a storm. Marcus was the first to speak. Jessica, are you sure about this? The offer really was extraordinary. The offer was for money, Marcus. But they weren't buying our company. They were buying our destruction. Dr. Williams nodded slowly. I've seen this pattern before. Acquire, dismantle, absorb the profitable pieces. It's efficient from a capital perspective, but devastating from a human perspective, Maria added. 60% of our people would lose their jobs, and our clients would lose the personalized service that made them choose us in the first place, I said. Harrison wants to buy our relationships and then exploit them through their corporate machinery. Robert Chin leaned forward. So, what do we do now? Victoria wasn't entirely wrong about the competitive landscape. Larger companies are acquiring smaller ones at an unprecedented rate. Then we make ourselves too valuable to acquire and too strong to crush. Over the next few months, we implemented what I called our fortress strategy. Instead of trying to compete with larger companies on their terms, we doubled down on what made us unique. We expanded our client service model, creating even more personalized relationships. We invested in employee development, making our teams so skilled and satisfied that competitors couldn't poach them. We formed strategic partnerships with other independent companies, creating a network that could compete with larger entities while maintaining our values. Most importantly, we documented everything. Every process, every relationship, every innovation. We made our company's values so clearly tied to our people and culture that any acquisition would be meaningless without keeping everything intact. Marcus proved instrumental in this effort. His strategic thinking, now tempered by wisdom and humility, helped us identify opportunities for growth that didn't compromise our principles. You know, he said during one of our planning sessions, 6 months ago, I would have recommended taking Harrison's offer. It would have looked like a huge win on paper. And now I understand that some things can't be measured in quarterly reports. The fortress strategy worked better than we'd hoped. Our client base grew by 30%, our employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, and our financial performance improved steadily. More importantly, we maintained the culture and values that made people want to work with us. 6 months after rejecting Harrison's offer, Victoria Hartwell called again. Ms. Miller, I'd like to schedule another meeting. Harrison is prepared to significantly improve our previous offer. How significantly? 60% above market value. And we're willing to guarantee employment for 75% of your current workforce. I almost laughed. Ms. Hartwell, 6 months ago you threatened to crush us. Now you're offering even more money. What changed? Your performance has been impressive. Our performance has been consistent. What's changed is your need to acquire us has become more desperate. There was a pause. Harrison recognizes Meridian's value to the marketplace. Harrison recognizes that we've proven you can't crush companies that truly serve their clients and employees. We've become the alternative to your model, and that threatens your whole acquisition strategy. I wouldn't put it quite that way. I would. Ms. Hartwell, the answer is still no. But thank you for confirming that we've built something worth protecting. When I shared the call with our leadership team, the reaction was unanimous relief. They're afraid of us, Marcus said with something approaching wonder. A year ago, I thought bigger was always better. Now I see that better is better. And we're just getting started, I replied. The real vindication came a year later, when 3 of Harrison's previous acquisitions reached out to us for partnership opportunities. Companies that had been stripped of their identity and culture, whose remaining employees were looking for ways to rebuild what they'd lost. We couldn't hire them all, but we helped them form their own independent companies, sharing our strategies and serving as a model for sustainable business practices. The network of independent companies we'd started was becoming a movement. You know what the best part is? Dr. Williams said during one of our board meetings. We're not just protecting our own company anymore. We're proving that there's a different way to do business entirely. A way that values people over profit margins, Maria added. And relationships over transactions, Robert contributed. Marcus looked thoughtful. A year and a half ago, I walked into this company thinking I knew better than everyone here. Now I realize I was the one who needed to learn.
We all need to keep learning, I said.
The moment we think we know everything is the moment we become like Harrison. Or like I was when I first arrived, Marcus said quietly. The difference is you chose to learn. That's what made all the difference. As I looked around the table at these people who'd become more than colleagues, I realized that the real victory hadn't been rejecting a hostile takeover or building a successful company. It had been creating something worth protecting, something that made people's lives better, something that proved a different way was possible. Sometimes the greatest success isn't beating your enemies. It's refusing to become them. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself, quietly and consistently, until the world around you has no choice but to take notice. That's the kind of power that lasts. That's the kind of victory that matters. And that's the kind of leader I'm proud to be. 2 years later, I found myself in an unexpected position, testifying before a congressional subcommittee on corporate responsibility and employee welfare. The network of independent companies we'd helped establish had caught the attention of legislators concerned about monopolistic business practices and the human cost of corporate consolidation. Ms. Miller, the committee chair, began, "Your company's approach to rejecting acquisition offers and building collaborative networks has been described as a model for sustainable business practices. Can you explain your philosophy?" I looked out at the packed hearing room, knowing that my words would be broadcast across the country and analyzed by business schools, corporate boards, and employees wondering if there was a better way to work. "Senator, it's quite simple. We believe that companies exist to serve people, not the other way around. When you start with that principle, every other decision becomes clear. But critics argue that your approach is unsustainable in a competitive global market. How do you respond to that?" Our critics said the same thing 2 years ago when we rejected Meridian Industries' acquisition offer. They predicted we'd be crushed within 6 months. Instead, we've grown by over 200%. Our employee retention rate is 98%, and our client satisfaction scores are the highest in our industry. A murmur of interest rippled through the hearing room. "What's different about your approach?" "We invest in people instead of replacing them. We build relationships instead of exploiting them. And we measure success by the value we create for all stakeholders, not just shareholders." After the hearing, I was approached by a young woman who looked like she couldn't be more than 25. "Ms. Miller? I'm Sarah Chun from the Wall Street Journal. I've been following your company's story for months. Could I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you stay quiet about your ownership for so long? Most people in your position would have used that authority from day one." I thought about her question as we walked through the Capitol building's marble corridors. Because authority without understanding is just tyranny with better PR. I needed to understand the company, the people, and the problems before I could use my position responsibly. "And Marcus Wellington? He tried to fire you, humiliated you publicly. Weren't you tempted to destroy his career?" Destroying someone who made a mistake doesn't solve anything. It just creates fear in everyone else. Marcus became a better leader because he was given the chance to learn from his errors, not because he was punished for them. That's unusual in corporate America. Maybe that's the problem. The article that Sarah Chin wrote became one of the most widely shared business pieces of the year. Not because it revealed corporate scandals or financial irregularities, but because it offered hope that business could be done differently. The response was overwhelming. Emails from employees trapped in toxic corporate cultures, from entrepreneurs looking for alternatives to traditional venture capital, from students questioning whether they had to choose between financial success and personal values. But the message that affected me most came from an unexpected source, Victoria Hartwell. "Ms. Miller," she wrote, "I've been thinking about our conversations over the past 2 years. You were right about Harrison's acquisition strategy, and you were right about the cost of treating people as disposable assets. I've left Harrison and am starting my own consulting firm focused on sustainable business practices. I'd like to learn from your model if you're willing to teach." I stared at the email for a long time before responding. Victoria Hartwell, the woman who had threatened to crush us, was asking to learn from us. It was perhaps the clearest vindication of our approach we could have received. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near our office. Victoria arrived looking different than I remembered, less polished, more genuine. "I want to apologize," she said as soon as we sat down. "Not just for the threats, but for the entire mindset I brought to that negotiation. I saw your company as nothing more than assets to be acquired and optimized." "What changed your mind?" "Watching what happened afterward. Harrison did acquire 3 of your competitors over the past 2 years. Every single acquisition followed the same pattern: massive layoffs, client dissatisfaction, and ultimately, destruction of value. Meanwhile, you built something stronger. And now I want to help other companies do what you did. Not just resist acquisition, but build something worth resisting for." Over the following months, Victoria became an unexpected ally. Her insider knowledge of corporate acquisition strategies, combined with our model of sustainable business practices, created a powerful framework for helping companies maintain their independence and values. Marcus, meanwhile, had evolved into something I hadn't expected: a teacher. Business schools began inviting him to speak about leadership transformation and the importance of humility in management. "The strangest thing," he told me after one of his speaking engagements, "is that students keep asking me about the moment I tried to fire you. They want to know what I was thinking, how I could have been so wrong." "What do you tell them?" "That I was thinking like someone who'd been taught that leadership meant having all the answers. It took Jessica showing me otherwise to realize that the best leaders are the ones who ask the best questions." "And what's the most important question?" "How can I serve the people I lead, instead of how can they serve me?" The network of independent companies we'd helped establish continued to grow. By the end of our 3rd year, over 50 companies had adopted variations of our model. Some were former acquisition targets that had chosen independence. Others were startups built from the ground up with sustainable practices, and still others were established companies that had transformed their cultures. We called it the Independence Network, and it was proving that small and medium-sized companies could compete effectively with corporate giants without sacrificing their values or their people. The ultimate test came when one of the largest consulting firms in the world approached us with an offer to franchise our model globally. "Think about the impact you could have," their representative argued. "Instead of helping 50 companies, you could help 5,000. Instead of changing one industry, you could change business itself." It was tempting. The financial returns would be enormous, and the potential for global impact was undeniable. But I'd learned to ask different questions. What happens to our existing network when we scale this large? They become part of the larger system, with access to more resources and opportunities. And what happens to the personal relationships, the individual attention, the local understanding that makes our model work? Well, obviously some of that would need to be standardized. There was the word that revealed everything: standardized. The same impulse that had driven Harrison's acquisition strategy, dressed up in the language of growth and opportunity. "Thank you for the offer," I said, "but we're not interested in scaling our model. We're interested in teaching others to develop their own." The consultant looked confused. "But think about the revenue potential you're leaving on the table." "I'm thinking about the relationships we destroy in pursuit of that revenue." After they left, Marcus shook his head in amazement. 2 years ago, I would have called you crazy for turning down that opportunity. And now I understand that not all growth is good growth. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stay true to what works. Even when it means saying no to easy money? Especially then. As I write this, 5 years have passed since Marcus Wellington walked into our conference room and tried to fire me. 5 years since I revealed that the quiet woman in operations actually owned the company he was trying to reshape. Meridian Industries has become something I never expected. Not just a successful business, but a symbol of what's possible when you choose people over profit margins, relationships over transactions, and sustainability over short-term gains. Marcus is now our Chief Strategy Officer, and the transformation in his leadership style has become a case study taught in business schools. Victoria Hartwell's consulting firm has helped dozens of companies resist hostile takeovers and build sustainable practices. The Independence Network continues to grow, Not through franchising or acquisition, but through organic relationships and shared values. Most importantly, we've proven that you don't have to choose between financial success and human dignity. Our revenues have grown every year, our profit margins are healthy, and our return on investment consistently outperforms industry averages. But our real return on investment is measured in different terms: employees who love their work, clients who trust us completely, and a business model that creates value for everyone involved. The young woman who once sat quietly at her desk, afraid to speak up in meetings, has become someone very different. Not because she gained power, but because she learned to use it wisely. Not because she defeated her enemies, but because she showed them a better way. Sometimes I think about that moment in the conference room when Marcus asked why I hadn't told him who I was. The answer is still the same, because the people who matter figure it out eventually, and the ones who don't show you exactly why they don't. But I've learned something else. True leadership isn't about revealing your power at the perfect dramatic moment. It's about using whatever influence you have, whether hidden or obvious, to create something worth protecting. That's what real victory looks like. Not the moment when you prove you were right all along, but the years afterward when you prove that being right was just the beginning. The most dangerous people in business aren't the ones who threaten to destroy you. They're the ones who convince you that destruction is inevitable, that there's no alternative to their way of doing things. But there's always an alternative. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to build it, patient enough to sustain it, and wise enough to share it with others who are ready to choose a different path. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people who once tried to tear down what you built will become the ones helping you build something even better. That's the kind of ending I'm proud to write. That's the kind of story I'm proud to live. And that's the kind of leader I'm proud to be. The quiet woman who owned the company was never really quiet at all. She was just waiting for the right moment to speak up and for the right people to listen. Now the whole world is listening. And the conversation is just getting started.